Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be making Maze, one of the exclusive patterns that is only available in my new book, Fat Quarter Workshop. Some of the other patterns were some of our best, most downloaded patterns from our Stash with Stephanie Club, but this one is brand new and has never been released before. It is going to be a log cabin. It uses a little bit wider strips, so it definitely is good if you've got a little bit bigger print that you want to show off in your quilt. And it also goes together super fast, and I'm going to be able to show you how to cut these because we cut it a little bit different than we do typically when we're cutting things apart, but it really goes super fast. I did this, I was on deadline with this book right when the pandemic started and right when I had a newborn baby, and I had 2 quilts that I had to do exclusively for the book, and I managed to do that while everything else crazy was going on and while we were shipping out tons of mass kits because you couldn't buy them in the stores yet. And it was an insane time, and I managed to get it done in about a week's time, and that included the quilting and the binding, so it's pretty good. So that is super awesome, and it goes super fast. Now, a couple of notes about your fabric choices for this quilt. Because we have a neutral background here, you want to make sure that you are choosing a fabric collection that has lots of prints that are going to contrast very nicely with your background. If you have a lot of really light prints that are very close in value to your background, it's not going to stand out and you're not going to get the same effect of the design that you're looking for here. So you need a lot of medium and dark value prints for the dark half of your log cabin, and a lot of light and a very high contrast lighter value for your background. Now you can always switch that into a dark background and do medium and light for your other strips, but you just, you have to have that contrast. Is very important. And that's also important because sometimes a lot of collections will include a lot of options for background fabric. So you might have, like the quilt that we did for the sample size needed 14 fat quarters. So you might have a bundle that has 14 fat quarters in it, but you have to check and make sure that there's 14 where the color of the print reads at medium or dark in the color value, or you're not going to get the effect you're looking for. Now, we don't have quilt kits for this one. This fabric is a one and done, so it is no longer available, but we have included a link to our current supply of fat quarters. Again, just make sure that you're taking a look and making sure that you are getting, if you were doing the size we did, that there's 14 prints that are the medium and dark. You can always get 2 if there aren't quite enough, if you really love that fabric collection or you're pulling through your stash. That works as well. All right, so this fabric is actually not part of this collection. I managed to somehow save everything. This was one block that was left over since like March, but I somehow lost my tiny square for my darker prints. So, but it works out good because I'm going to be able to show you how we cut a little bit differently. And so let's get started with this quilt. So typically when we cut fat quarters, you're going to be cutting from your selvage edge up to the top where the fold of the fabric would have been, but it's been cut across. And typically we say that you need 21 inches in almost every pattern that we do of usable fabric. So that's 21 inches from where the end of this selvage is to the top, and that will give you enough, and most fabrics will be able to do that. Occasionally you'll have one where the selvage is super fat and that doesn't work very well. It's a little bit different when you're doing a log cabin, because what you want to be able to do is cut and have it not get stretchy on you. So fabric is woven together, there's a warp and a weft, and if you try to pull this way, you don't get too much give. So this is the width of fabric, this is the length of fabric. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to cut across the length of the fabric because you don't get too much stretch, whereas if I pull this way, you can see it, you get quite a bit more movement. And so that will help if you've ever struggled with log cabins, getting wonky and not quite fitting together right. It's probably because you cut across the length of the width of the fabric instead of the length of the fabric when you were doing that, and then it just kind of stretched on you a little bit as you were going. Of course, using quilt shop quality cotton will always help make everything go better. So I'm not going to give you any of the actual measurements here. Those are available in the book, which you can purchase at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. But I am going to walk you through how to cut a up your fat quarter. So that way you know how to do it at home, because it is just a tad bit different than normal with that different way of cutting. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut across the length of the fabric. So I've still got this selvage edge down here, just like I normally would. And I'm going to cut two things. I'm gonna cut a very wide strip that is going to become our log cabin strips, and then I'm going to cut a binding strip, because we're able to have scrappy binding for this quilt to use up every single square inch of that fat quarter, so there's almost no waste. So you can see I've got part of my fat quarter hanging off the edge here. This fat quarter was cut a little bit crooked. Most of them are, so if you get some home and they're wonky, like, don't worry, that's totally normal, and we have made adjustments for that in the pattern. Most people who write patterns do that. I don't pre-wash my fabric, by the way, because I want to have every single usable inch, and I don't want them to shrink up too much on me. So, and then I also have it going past the measurement that I need to cut to here. So I'm going to line up my ruler at the top and bottom, so that way I can cut using my mat in order to get this to the width of fabric that I need. Now, without moving any of this fabric, I'm just going to go ahead and lift my ruler up and cut my binding strip as well, while I've got everything here nice and flat. Get that out of the way. Now again, leaving this super flat exactly where it was when I cut it, I'm going to go ahead and flip this around. So that my 0-inch mark is now on the right side where I cut. I'm right-handed. And so now I'm gonna line the ruler up on the 0-inch mark on the top and bottom of my mat, and I'm gonna get that cut to size. All right, so now I've got my piece here that is cut to the width I need it to be. Now you can do this at single width, or you can do like I'm going to do here, and I'm going to flip this and fold it over. You also could layer up to like 4 layers of fabric and cut all at once, but I'm just making sure that my edges are nice and even here, and I am also kind of making sure I can see my selvage edge here, so I want to make sure that this edge here is above that. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that over, and now I'm going to cut across the length of the fabric to cut my log cabin strips out. All right, so I now have this cut into strips. I was able to get 8 of these from my fat quarter, and I've got them layered up here. So I have sets of 2, because I'm gonna want 2 of each of these from it. And it's laid out, and there's a really good diagram here, and we've labeled the pieces A through G, so it should be pretty simple and straightforward for you guys to figure out. But I just want to, like I said, it's a little different than normal, so we're going to go over it. So now here's the fun part. All the pieces are going to be cut from this now. So you're going to be able to cut it and then have a corresponding piece that matches on the other one. So the first thing I'm going to cut, I'm going to go ahead and cut my A and my F piece. So I can follow the measurements in the book, and then I can give that a little trim. And now I've got an A piece and an F piece. Now for the next one, it's going to be a little bit bigger, because those log cabin strips are going to get bigger as you go. Now your G piece is the only one where we're going to cut it, trim it down, and then get rid of the extra bit. This is going to be the outside piece for your block, so it's going to be the width of the final block. So it's super simple, super fast. I cut enough for 2 blocks here for the dark side, and you can, like I said, you can cut a couple layers at a time. Make sure you have a good sharp rotary blade, or things will shift and not end up the size they should be. But you can safely do up to 4 layers of fat quarters to speed cut this, again, if you've got that fresh rotary blade. All right, you're gonna do the same thing for your background. Just follow the measurements for that, so that way you can cut that down as well. Obviously you're not going from fat quarters, so you're just gonna cut really long widths of fabric and then trim it across the length like we did here to create the sizes that you need. Again, all that's in the book. I'm not gonna list it here because you have to pick up a copy of the Fat Quarter Workshop in order to get it. It's only $14.99 and it comes with 12 quilt patterns. Normally quilt patterns are 12 bucks, so this is like a huge deal. So grab a copy, lots of fun stuff in it in addition to this pattern. All right, so I'm gonna clear the decks here and get ready to start sewing our block together. So when I made this quilt, I stacked up absolutely everything on top of each other. I had all my blocks ready to go there, and that way I wouldn't accidentally mess up the order, and I just left it in place until I was done sewing my blocks together. That's what I recommend that you guys do as well, just because it can be easy to kind of flip-flop where these are, and then it ends up being kind of weird when you go back to do it later. So try to either, if you're going to do it in sections, make sure that you consult the book every single time you lay this out to make sure you get it in the right order. Otherwise it will look a little weird in your final quilt. You might not be able to tell why, and if you gift it to someone, they definitely won't be able to tell why, but it is important that everything stays in the exact same spot for every single quilt when you get that center going. All right, so a log cabin block is a very traditional block. It's what makes this one look modern is the fabrics I've chosen, and then the setting with that maze look where we're kind of going out and around. That's not something that you would traditionally see. You normally see barn raising, or you know, a couple of different ways that you can put log cabins together. It's really endless. But what we're going to do is we're just going to start at the center here and then just keep working our way out. So I'm just going to grab these guys, put them right sides together, and go ahead and sew with that 1/4 inch seam. Now I didn't pin, I don't think, any of this. What I did is I just lined up my edges and I put my finger down to hold everything in place when it's small, and then I'll show you what we do when we get a little bigger too. You see I put my finger to the side here. That helps me hold it and maintain that 1/4 inch seam all the way to the end when I can't hold on to it at the tip anymore. It's another reason why it's a good idea to lay everything out, because then you could chain piece all of these and it goes a lot faster to sew them all, then press them all, and then sew again than it does to just take your time and do one little block at a time. It's going to take you a really long time to do that quilt. I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open. I'm going to press all my seams open for this quilt. I find it's sometimes your log cabin blocks can shrink a little bit as you're working on them, and the way to avoid that is by pressing your seams open, because when you press it over it takes up just the teeniest little bit of fabric, but when you have all the seams you have in a log cabin, that can make a really big difference, and it can be pretty short and have your extra strips be really long by the time you get to the end. So when you get started, it's really important to lay your piece back down and make sure that everything looks right. Once we get around this first trip around, it's going to be a little easier to tell where the next strip goes, but for right now, always consult your book. All right, so I'm going to flip this over, and I always try to sew with the seam side up. That way I don't accidentally flip that going the wrong way. All right, I think what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you guys in fast motion as I go around this and press, and then we'll take a pause when we get to the second round so you know that fun little trick, so you know what's supposed to be next, and then we'll speed it up again to finish the rest of this block, because it really is very simple. You're just going round and round and round. So I have my center square all sewn together here, and so now the next one to do is my top piece. Now I can know that by looking at the book, but I also can know that because now that we've sewn all the way around, whatever seam is next is going to have 2 seams on it. So this one has 2 right here, we only have 1 here, we only have 1 here, and we don't have any on this side. So whichever one has 2 is the next one that fits onto it, because you'll get to a point like with this one, when I get this sewn together, either this piece or this piece would fit on it, and then it can be a little confusing which one is next when you lay down, but it's always going to be whichever one has those 2 seams. All right, so I'm going to keep sewing around. I'm going to show you how I line this up on this one. It's still pretty easy because it's small, but if you're getting to the bigger pieces, you absolutely can pin if you choose to. All right, so I'm just going to flip these guys right sides together. What I do is I just hold it up and look at those corners, and I line them up, and I really am concerned most about the one on my left, and I'm going to get that lined up first because that's what's going to go in the sewing machine first. So I'm going to take a few stitches in, and now I can get to these and I can pinch them together, and I'm just going to pinch them together and hold them, and I'm just going to kind of put a finger down on those seams as I'm going to make sure everything stays where it should, and I'm just going to guide that all the way down. And again, when I get to this point, I'm just going to move my hand to the left, have my finger there, so that way I can get my really standard 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. That really matters with this block, because otherwise it can get just smaller and smaller and smaller with every single stitch if your 1/4 inch is off. I haven't had any issues yet where these are turning out to be the wrong size. Mathematically, everything should work. So if you've cut everything correctly, if you're pressing those seams open, if you are what else? Pressing the seams open, doing an accurate 1/4 inch seam, and you cut everything right, everything should fit together just fine. Now, if you need to give it a little bit of tension to ease in just a smidge extra, no big deal, it's gonna totally work out. If you're ending up with like an extra 1/4 inch, something went wrong somewhere, so you might wanna make like a test block first to make sure everything is going right, and then decide from there. Now, if you find that every single one of your blocks ends up like a 1/4 inch smaller, that's fine, as long as they're all consistent, because they're all going to get sewn together in the end. But if you're getting drastically different results depending from block to block, then you're going to have a real hard time fitting that together. So pay attention to that as you're going, so that way you have success and you love your quilt in the end. All right, so I'm gonna speed it up again as I sew around the rest of it. We'll play some fun music for you again, and you can just see this block come together. It's super fun. I love these because every one turns out just a little bit different, and it's just a really fun way to really make use of that fat quarter bundle. One of the final things I'd like to do with any quilt block is give it a spritz with my spray mister. It turns any liquid into an aerosol, and so I can really easily just mist the entire top of the block. I don't like to use steam in my iron. I feel like it distorts the fabric, and that gives me the ability to really get really flat, beautiful seams and get this block ready to be put together. Here you can see I press the bottom, it looks fabulous, and the top is still a little, not wrinkly, just not as flat as it could be. So this is it. This is the Maze quilt block. It is super easy, super fast, great way to show off those prints because you really have got some pretty decent sized strips to work with. It really shows off these strawberries really well here, and also has some fun with all the other prints. Again, if you're doing this at home, make sure that when you're selecting your fabric that you are choosing all medium and dark values for the dark side of the block, the print side, then that they contrast really nicely with your background. We have highlighted in our email that we're sending out to our email subscribers some of the ones that we currently have in stock that would work great for this, but that's something you want to look out for when you are selecting fabric. Again, this pattern and all the measurements, and it's available in multiple sizes. If you do the size that we did in the book, then you are going to need 13 fat quarters. I said 14 at the beginning of the video, but it's actually 13. I double checked that. And so keep that in mind when you're purchasing fabric or you're pulling from your stash. My favorite version of this is the King, which goes out really big. We'll put together a graphic of what that looks like, and you can really see the maze like in its full glory for that one. For that one, you're going to need 25 of the really darker prints. So that would be a great one. There are very few collections that actually have 25 like fold in your face prints. Very, very few. But that would be a good one if you've been collecting fabrics for a while, like with our Stash with Stephanie Club, and you have some that play nice together, or you have a favorite designer like Tula Pink or Allison Glass and you have a whole collection of their things. That's when you can kind of get some things together, because those fabrics are going to play nice from collection to collection, because I keep that in mind. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you liked having a little bit of a color value lesson to go with it as well. And go check out the book, Fat Quarter Workshop, and it's my second book. And this pattern maze is only available and has only ever been featured in the book. It was not available before. It's not going to be available on its own later. You got to go in the book to get this. It's pretty much a simple log cabin. What makes it modern is your fabric choice and the setting. So it makes it really fun, and it goes really fast. So you can have a lot of fun with this one. All right, everybody, stay safe out there and happy quilting.